jump in. All right, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for Ask a Consultant. It's May 19th and we're talking about navigating HR in a virtual world. My name is Lisa Mae Simpson. I am the VP for Learning and Engagement at Forefront. We are the statewide association for grantmakers and nonprofits, as well as their advisors in Illinois, and we're really grateful to be partnering with the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits to bring you this weekly program, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Heather Eddy and Kay Sujata to talk with you today about our topic. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We are recording this session so you can review it later, and microphones are muted. So if you do have a question, please throw that into the chat. If it's technically related or if it's for the presenters, you can throw that into the Q&A, which you'll find down at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can submit questions anonymously through the Q&A, so please do feel free to put those in at any time. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Heather and Sujata to get us started on today's topic.
Thank you, Lisa. So glad to be doing this with Heather, who has lots of years of experience. My name is Sujata. My consulting practice focuses on leadership development, on organizational development. And I'm really been thinking a lot about resilience and how, particularly in these times. So great to see all of your questions today.
And welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm Heather, and Sujata and I first worked together. I looked it up, Sujata, in 1999. Oh my goodness, that's so long ago. And so it's fun to be reunited in this session to hopefully help you navigate some of the virtual and real HR challenges that you're encountering today. So I lead a team of highly talented professionals at Keys. We're a consulting firm that most know us for is executive search, but we do a lot of other consultation, HR consulting, issues with staffing, things like that. So thrilled to be here today and hopefully answer most of your questions. We get some questions in advance, so Sujata and I each prepared a couple of talking points, which we're going to go through now, with a promise to keep that short so we can get right into the Q&A and make this session most useful for you. So, Sujata, I'm going to let you go first.
Thanks, Heather. So I thought I would just frame up today's conversation in the context of the economic shutdown that we are experiencing with the slow opening. In spite of the PPP and the CARES Act, many nonprofits are still facing some gut-wrenching decisions in terms of their staffing. And the choices you make will depend really on a number of factors, including programming, whether there's a greater demand or a lesser demand, what your revenue models might be, whether you are, have earned revenue that you're losing or grant money that you're gaining thanks to some COVID emergency money, as well as whether or not you have financial reserves. And all of these factors will play into your decisions in addition to your own identity as an organization, your culture, and the values in which you bring. So as you think about this next phase of this pandemic and organizational response, going from a responsive to what I or others really call the recovery and potentially to the thriving phase, there will be a number of strategic considerations you have to make when you consider your staff reductions or even gains. We've sort of put these in sort of 4 parts. The first is sort of think about the framing of how you think about your organization. Do you see employees as stakeholders, or are you more interested in conserving cash, where you're really concerned about making sure that the organization is there for the future? And you will respond differently. If you're thinking of employees as stakeholders, you're going to do everything necessary to keep particularly those key employees in place. When you think about conserving cash, you may be thinking about how you use your cash reserves or your rainy day fund. The next point is to think beyond the funding silos. Sometimes funding you get is dedicated to funding a particular person or a particular role. Is there an opportunity to think more broadly, and can you sustain that role with some general operating money, or if you have reserves, or in some other way, or reduced, or with a reduced budget, or do you have to lay them off? Many funders have been particularly good about helping with and allowing you to make some changes and allowing you to go forward to use project money for general operating funds. So think, if you haven't done already, it's a good time to think about that. The third point I want to make is to protect staff diversity. If your organization is typically thought about reduction in staff as last in, first out, sort of laying off people who are the newest to the organization, I would advise you, caution you to think about what that means to your organization and what that means to your staff diversity and how you can still continue to maintain staff diversity. And then the fourth point is to prioritize technology. This is really an opportunity to think about using technology in different ways. Just the way we're doing this webinar today, we seem to have really got into quite seamlessly a way to go to do webinars as opposed to doing in person. So there are other factors that in your own work, you can think about using technology in different ways when it comes to your staffing decision. And finally, I've been saying this a lot to folks, this is really an opportunity. I know it doesn't seem like one, but this is truly an opportunity to be bold, to do things that, and to do things that you've been wanting to do for a while, but haven't been able to do. Now is an opportunity. Both funders and the situation really allow you to take chances. So I urge you to think about that. And if you're not an organization that does a lot of advocacy and organizing, now is truly the time to step into those areas and think more about how you get involved in advocacy and organizing, because we need more voices than ever. So at this point, after this sort of broad overview, I'm going to turn it over to Heather, who has more specific ideas on tips on how to move forward in the current times. Heather.
Thank you. So some of you sent in questions ahead of time, and that's how Sujata and I framed our 3 slides. And one of those questions was around kind of hiring and workforce and staff. And so I share with you today that we are still seeing nonprofits hire. So as many nonprofits and great magnitudes of layoffs and furloughs and whatnot, we are also seeing hiring. So I this morning went through some of the key job sites that we look at. And NPO had 213 jobs. So that's if you're in Chicago, that's a local Chicago, although regional job board. ASAE, which is Association Executives, had 122 jobs. AFP, which are the fundraising people, over 200 jobs. Senior living, the primary nonprofit senior living source, so that would include a lot of direct caregivers like CNAs and nurses and whatnot, 1,452 jobs. So organizations are still hiring. A lot of what we're hearing people talk about and what we're getting asked about is how to take 3 jobs and make them into 2. How to be creative, how to think of restructuring. And so we're encouraging flexibility as a key mindset from both an employer standpoint and how you structure your team, as well as from an employee standpoint. Payroll Protection Act, PPP, I'm hoping all of you, if you applied for it, those are all completed now. I hear there is still a good chunk of money available. There are specific loans to follow, and we don't want to get into any of the legal things, but the things we want to give you are general advice is those guidelines are around both head count and salary or cost of salary, a dollar value. Some of the questions were around, you know, kind of furloughing staff and bringing on new staff. The key point here is keep in mind that those are requirements to make the loan convert into a grant and make it forgivable. If you don't get forgiveness on everything, it's only 1%. And I realize in tight economic times, anything is cost us a lot of money. But let's say you got $1 million loan and 700,000 is forgivable. You're only going to pay the interest on the part that's not forgivable. So use it wisely and not make rash decisions we're hearing a lot about the 8-week decision time frame. Try to use it to think more broadly than just the 8 weeks. Look for opportunities to shift and recalibrate roles on your team. It's a great time to train people up, offer skill development, let them try something new if it's a closely aligned function you need filled, but it's out of their core job area. So think about your staff, you know, keep hiring if you are hiring, keep thinking about recalibration and how you can reframe things. The market is doing that. Your colleagues and peers and other nonprofits are doing that, and foundations and all types of organizations. And to the degree you can use any support or grant funding or anything that you have in place that gives you some degree of stability, use that as a way to fund your planning time now so that when recovery does happen, that you're back stronger than ever. The next piece that we heard some of the questions centered around were around culture, both past, virtual, and future. So if culture is not something your organization paid a lot of attention to before, certainly hope that this time is one that allows you to shift your energy toward culture. Younger generations and up and coming generations play significantly higher degree of value on the culture they work within and the people that work around them. So pay attention to culture. If you didn't assess your culture before, now is a great time to do it. Do a quick 5-question survey and say, hey, you know, describe our culture before, describe it now, and describe it as you want to see it when you come back. We had a lot of EDs and CEOs sign up for this. That's a great way for you to communicate directly with all of your staff by you asking that question personally. The other thing then is, how are you doing with your virtual culture right now? Is it just business as usual and you're doing it online, or are you doing things different? Our team at Keys, we now have a weekly huddle. We also have a weekly cocktail hour or a weekly get together. They're probably would like us to do all a weekly workout. I'm not there yet, but different things. I was with a group this morning and they do something called the weekly situation room. And so it's, what's the situation? How are we all feeling? So be intentional and take time to do those sorts of things, because your virtual culture and what you're doing now will make a big difference in how you go back to what's ever next for you. And what kind of culture you want when we go back, however you define go back. I find it vastly interesting. My oldest son and his wife, they're in their late 20s, and they both received on the same day, they both work for large companies, a survey from their HR department that, you know, was assessing, do you want to keep working at home? What do you like about working from home? When you come back to the office, what are some things you want to be different? What are your concerns for health and safety? All of those things I thought were very proactive of their employers. And I would encourage all of you to, you know, do a couple quick surveys, hear what people are saying, because there's an eagerness to get back to work, but people are going to want to do it in a way that makes them feel safe and comfortable. And get back to work is very different if you are a nurse or a mental health therapist or a office staff person. So make sure you're getting people's inputs to see what get back to work means and how you're going to make it work for your organization. So those, I think, are the general topics we wanted to get through, and then really open it up, and Lisa, turn it back to you so that we can be sure to make this discussion relevant for all of our attendees.
Thank you so much, Heather and Sujata, for framing that up so well. I see we already have a question in the Q&A box. Please keep those coming, and I'll just first throw out a few of the questions that we got in advance. You all did such a great job of covering some of those topics generally, but wanted to share some slightly more specific questions to see what guidance you can provide. So one of the first questions that we got was around how do I encourage others, and I am interpreting that as maybe staff members or colleagues, to continue moving forward when business opportunities might be shutting down. Thoughts about kind of helping to keep morale up when things are uncertain or possibly feel like they're really shifting in a negative way?
I'll put that under resilience, and Sujata, if you want to unmute and then go, or I can go first, whatever you want. We'll put that in your bucket.
Okay, I'll get started. So I've been thinking a lot about resilience, and this is really the time to think about the organizations that are going to survive and do really well and thrive are those who are resilient, and really thinking, if you as EDs haven't already thought about supporting the key folks in your organization, and I don't mean just your senior team or your senior staff, but think about all those critical folks in your organization, those valuable folks in your organization that are really important to not only to the work, but who bring a lot more to the organization. How have you been supporting them? How will you continue to support them? And how will you make sure that they are supported for the future? Because without a doubt, when there is a reduction in force, morale will dip. That is a given. I think it's very, very hard for those who stay behind. I've heard it compared to survivor guilt. So it is hard. So think about all of the things that you can do to continue supporting those who are critical to the organization. And Heather threw out a couple of ideas to keep that team supported. I'm sure she has many more. How will you make sure that you let them know that they're important to the organization and they're critical? How will you get their feedback in the work that you're doing? And how will you be transparent? Communication is key. And how will you be transparent, which includes how will you gain trust, and that includes what is it that you can let them know, and what is it that you can tell them that you don't know at the moment? So just to be clear about all of that. Heather?
So one of the things one of our early career team members told me in the very beginning was just be transparent, be natural. Come to a video meeting in your yoga pants and your hair up, not like, we're going to meet clients, and be natural, be authentic, be transparent. And I think that was a wake up to me, that our team, wants to just see me as their leader, as a person, as well as their boss. And so that, that trust building and that inherent create confidence that staff have in you as leaders is both professional, and it's okay to be transparent. If you don't know the answer to something, don't, tell them that. Say, I don't know. I'll use a very real example with our team. We applied for PPP loan funding and typed the wrong phone number on, so we couldn't get an activation code. And so I just kept having to say to our team, I don't know if we're going to get funding yet. I just don't know. I'm sorry. Here's what I can tell you. Here's what I do know, but here's what I don't know. And so be transparent. Obviously, that's hard to do when you're in large group settings or 200-person webcasts. a quick message from you as a leader, whether you're the CEO ED or whether you're a departmental leader. Every other Friday, 2 little paragraphs or 5 short bullet points. Just remember to stay in contact. You're making lots of big decisions. You're moving in lots of different directions, but the people all throughout your organization would appreciate hearing from you as their leader, or hearing from you as their department head or their boss, however big your organization is structured. That will give more confidence than predicting something that may or may not happen. Is just communicate. Say 5 short bullets, and here's what's going on, and I appreciate all of you, and here's the difference you're making. Sometimes that can get overused, but keep it authentic and keep it real, and they will appreciate it.
Great, thank you both. We had a couple of questions related to, as you alluded to this, Heather, kind of going back, whatever going back looks like. So 2 specific questions, asking if you have some tips or strategies for transitioning back to the office after working 100% remotely for at least 10 weeks, if not longer. And also a question that I think is related about if an employee does not want to be back in the office when the office reopens, how do employers handle this? And I think you brought this up earlier with your suggestion about a survey, but when you hear that feedback, what do you do with it?
Maybe I'll start with the how to transition back, and then Sujata, you can jump in and take the next one, or the second one, kind of what if they don't want to come back. Plan for it now. None of us were ready for shutdown and quarantine, and did a remarkably amazing job in most cases, and all the stories we hear of in 1 to 2 to 3 weeks, now we're doing this. So plan for that comeback and have a couple options. Just like the state of Illinois has, okay, option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4, option 5, or whatever state you're in. I think we've got a St. Louis person with us, but follow your guidelines and plan, minimum of 3 scenarios. Okay, if we come back in this way, it's going to look like this. This way, it's going to look like that, and build that with input. Don't assume you as leader or leadership have all of the input, right there in those that you're talking to daily. Make sure that you're either checking in with each department or with each level within your organization, and build that strategy with input. People will be far more receptive to what your plans are to go back if they've had opportunities to influence it and help you build what that strategy is. So make sure to look at that, make sure to build consensus, make sure to communicate it in advance, and communicate it if this is fully 100% certain or 80% certain, so that you leave some room for change if needed. Now, if people don't want to come back, that's a different story.
Yeah, so if people don't want to be back in the office when the office reopens, if you don't already have a telecommuting policy, I would strongly suggest starting there to have a telecommuting policy that includes, how much people can work from home. Make sure those policies are approved, go through the proper channels, but make sure you have a policy that lays out how often people can work from home, what are the conditions, what kind of technology will you provide as an organization to those who are working from home. It's all of those things that go into a telecommunications policy, and I think you can think about that. The one thing that I do want to sort of bring up is this question of fairness. Not only do you have to have that policy, but know that it needs to be applied fairly, and it needs to be applied across the board. Having said that, some of you may be running organizations or in organizations where it's not possible to have everybody working from home. So how do you handle that? If there are people who are working on the front line, who are providing services that you need to be able to provide, because of the organization you are. Think about what a fair telecommuting policy would be, so that those individuals are included as well. And how will you make it fair for them as well? Those are a couple of things that I would think about. You know, and ultimately, if you require them to be back, can you share with them kind of all the safety planning for health that you've been doing, that you will do when it's time for folks to go back to work in the office as opposed to working at home? And what will you know, and how will you let them know that it is safe to come back? Maybe it is that situation that they don't want to come back because they don't feel it's safe for them and their families. So what are the things that you will do? Will you reorganize the way the office furniture? Will you reorganize the placement of the desk? Will you stagger so that there are many options as you think about when people start coming back to work? What will make them feel safe and what will keep them safe?
And that's a great way to do a survey, Sujata. So, you know, ask 3 questions. What's your greatest health concern? What's your greatest cleanliness concern, or whatever the right word is? And what's your greatest spatial concern about how our workplace is laid out? You know, 3 simple questions. It's also a great, it would be a great vehicle to do a multi-level committee, maybe put together a comeback planning committee specifically around safety. You know, do you need hand sanitizers every 10 feet? Do you need extra soap in the bathrooms? Do you need masks everywhere? Employees have great ideas, and it's a great way to engage them and involve them in planning for their own environment.
Thank you. So we've gotten a couple of related questions around this idea of how do we go back and how do we think about equity as well as fairness. One specific question there, assuming schools stay closed in the fall, what kind of accommodations might folks think about making for people with and people without kids, even if the office is open but schools are not?
Wow, it's something I'm dreading too. So, and the joke in our house is I never would have been a teacher of the year. So we're certainly glad my husband can do all that at home education, but it is something. And I would go to what Sujata started with in a previous question is look at your policies. First of all, make sure your policies are up to date and relevant. And then look at how your policies apply to different job functions, different titles, or different structures of your organization, and quite frankly, you know, the uniqueness of your workforce. So if schools are not in session, can you offer altered work days? So could someone start, you know, from 6 a.m. and work until 2, or could they start at 2 and work into the evenings? Can they stagger their work week? Does their job need to be adjusted, and can it be done in 75% time versus 100% time? That is something that is interesting. So we do in our search practice a fair degree of remote positions. So we search for people that are home placed or work outside the main office location. Oftentimes in those projects, there is a definition of what it means, i.e. you must have childcare, you must have a closed door with an office, you must have this, you must have that. So starting with your policies and then filtering it through the different job functions you have, and then putting a lens of fairness and equity and transparency. Someone put a question in there that, you know, some jobs are different, and that's true. Office jobs you can do more easily from homes, but other direct care or hands-on jobs you can't. And if you explain to employees, both through policy and solid communication, why one aspect might be different for this department versus this department, I would think most rational people would understand. Not everyone will, and there will always be exceptions.
Yeah, and I apologize if I gave the impression that it's about treating everyone the same. It's not about treating everyone the same, but it's about treating everyone fairly and equitably for sure. And as Heather said, some jobs you can actually do from home, and others you cannot. You have to
And Sujata, I wonder if you had anything to add around this question that we got from Jackie, who says that in their organization it's not possible to treat everyone the same, but specifically they're asking, how can we communicate effectively that we're all doing our part even if everyone isn't doing the same thing? And I think, Heather, you spoke to this, but I wonder if you had anything to add there, Sujata.
Right. I mean, this question about communicating effectively goes back to isn't the slogan of the hour, we're all in this together? So let me fall back on that. We're all doing our parts in whatever ways we can. Even those who you think are not working, not because they don't want to work, but because it's not possible for them to work. And I can say the same thing about people with kids and people who don't have kids. I work with for instance with a colleague who splits where he does the teaching, the in-home teaching in the morning, and does his work in the afternoon, and his spouse does the flip of that. So people have figured out different ways. As employers, I think it is incumbent on us to understand, this is really testing this whole work-life balance to a huge extent. People are working tremendous number of hours. The question is, how do we offer grace? And how do we make sure that when we think about performance, what performance looks like and what results look like during this time. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm sort of, maybe I'm circling around it. Heather, any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I think what I would add to that, but also it answers a question we received around telecommuting and working in shared spaces, and one major concern may be transportation. I love surveys, if you can't tell. So this might be something as well that you invite people to give you feedback in a couple key areas. So if someone can't have adjusted hours because they use transportation that's not available 24/7, or they share a car, or the bus routes don't go at that time, that's something you can try to plan for and make reasonable accommodation if that is the environment that we all come back to. But you have to know what those needs are. You might presume it's a need, and other people may say, no, it's not a need. So it's going to be hard to develop an individual plan for every employee, especially the larger your organization. But if you get some generalities defined, like, okay, for who is a car driver and who uses other forms of transit, and then if you use other forms of transits, what are your limitations in terms of hours and times and things like that? Trying the efforts you make will be noticed, and reasonable people will understand, however large your workforce is, that you're trying to accommodate a large number of people.
Thank you both. So we also had some questions that came through in advance about, we've talked about supporting existing staff. We've talked about the possibilities of even hiring or getting creative about how we hire. We did get some questions about staff that may have been furloughed or laid off, and how to handle some of the situations that can come up around that. One was around furloughed staff that do not want to come back temporarily to support a PPP funded period. So So folks are probably familiar with and Heather, you referenced this, that 8-week sort of planning period that folks may be thinking about if you received a PPP loan. And this person's wondering, can I hire other people? Do I have to hire back the same staff? Any suggestions or resources that you might suggest pointing people towards?
So we both agreed we're going to disclaim we are not employment attorneys. We are not legally giving any kind of advice, because we don't want something to come happen and then you say, hey, Sujata and Heather said this on the webinar. There are a lot of resources out there, and I think Lisa and Emily are going to put some into the chat. I think we both agreed this morning, Sujata, that the website that has all the PPP rules, which they just released some good ones on Friday and again this morning, is a really excellent resource. So we would guide you there first.
It's a treasury.gov, I think.
Treasury.gov, okay. And there are a couple other ones out there. Many different accounting firms and financial services firms are offering all sorts of advice. But how to deal with that person that prefers to be laid off or prefers to be furloughed. Hopefully when you did that in the beginning, if you did do that, you were very clear on, we're doing this, we're making this change, here are the circumstances, we are your employer. You would certainly want to give notice, ample notice. I'm not sure what ample would be, maybe a week, 10 days, that, hey, we're coming back online. And I would hope all of those employees would approach you individually. You've got to be careful to be uniform, and again, as Sujata said, apply the policies to the positions. So there might be some people that have personal health situations, they're caring for parents or family members with COVID. That might be different than a person who just enjoys being furloughed and checking email once a day and maybe not doing anything towards your company, towards your mission. So, give notice for when you're coming back, and then work through those situations. You still have all your standard tools of PTO time or sick time, vacation time, FMLA, if your organization fits under that and is large enough. So be sure to look at all your normal HR policies and procedures to deal with the individual cases that people may bring up.
Thank you. We also did get a question that's a little more general about just how you might suggest handling the sensitive topic. And Sujata, you addressed this a little bit in your opening, of layoffs or needing to let staff go, or even to replace staff who may not be well suited to their roles currently. Thoughts about, and I'm reading into this a little bit of that question of how do we keep morale up, but also how do we handle those sorts of situations sensitively and appropriately?
So I have to say, probably need a little more background on this, but if we're talking about people you don't want to hire back, and you've let them know, and it's clear that you have, and as part of this process, you've done some restructuring. And as I said, this is probably also a time when organizations should be thinking about doing some of the things that they had thought about doing, but this is an opportunity to really try something new. So perhaps the job has changed, perhaps the position has changed, and as Heather mentioned, there is an opportunity for retraining, for offering existing employees other tools and other development options to step into those jobs. This is, I think, goes back to this issue around resiliency. We have to think about our organizations differently in terms of what we can and cannot do. Again, it goes back to this idea, like when people are let go, it will create a loss in morale. So if you take that as a given, the question is, what are the things you'll do to support the valuable employees you have left, right? And so the development plans, the personal development plans, the opportunities for growing in the organization, perhaps in different roles, the opportunities to continue to build the teamwork, the opportunity to do some social interactions, to do some social loafing is what I'm learning in my learning and organizational.
I love it.
So some of those things, if you can build some of those things so that it is truly about, relationships at a much deeper level. So how do you think about ways to build those deeper relationships so that you can still achieve the goals and the mission that you're working toward.
Thank you. Anything you'd add to that, Heather?
Yeah, I think that, the messaging is always hard, whether you furloughed and choose not to bring the people back, whether you're terminating someone, or whether they choose to leave on their own. I've talked with clients about situations where people have just outright resigned. The stress of the world is just making it where they can't do their jobs anymore, and they're not functioning well, and they're not healthy as a person before they consider themselves as an employee. So I think the degree to which you share messaging on behalf of the change that's being made, or whether individuals share it themselves after your formal announcement, the care and consideration you do that with makes all the difference in the world, and how transparent you are in your communications. And obviously there are laws and advice that is out there to protect you as an employer, that you can't just share everything. I think it also makes a big difference on how big your team is. If you're a team of 10 or 100 or 1,000, it makes a big difference. So be thoughtful, be careful. You've got to keep your organizations healthy for those employees that are still there and that will continue to be there, for the next 20 years. But you need to be considerate in the moment. And it's a balancing act, right? Every day we make choices about doing this and not that, and how we share messaging, and it's hard. But in light of the grander issues affecting the world, people will eventually understand. They may not understand right now, and they may carry a grudge for a while, whether it's that survivor guilt that Sujata spoke about, or whether it's the person impacted. But if history shows us anything, that there is change and evolution all the time. This is a bigger blip than we're used to, but it's not something that, the world's going to explode, we hope.
Indeed. Thank you both. A slightly more technical question. Catherine's asking if either of you have any recommendations for culture assessment tools or other resources related to those kinds of assessments that you were both suggesting earlier in the call.
Yeah.
So, I'll let Sujata go first, because mine's a little promotional, because we do that as a service. We actually do culture audits and started really doing them about 2 years ago. So ours are very personalized and tailored to each client and the cultural issues they're experiencing. But Sujata, anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, not offhand, but one of my clients is currently in the midst of that, and they're using a national group, and I'll send it to Lisa, and she'll be, I'm sure she can share it later. So I'll send it around.
Yep, happy to do that.
And if you're not doing anything formal, or it's not in your plans in the future to really use an online tool or a personalized culture assessment, just do one yourself. Again, I'm looking at our list, the titles. We have lots of top level executives of organizations by title on this call. Just shoot out those 2 or 3 simple questions and ask people to, if you do it as a blind copy, then they can't reply all and gripe with the whole list that you sent it to. They'll reply just to you. But invest the time to ask, or randomly ask all the A's and B last names today and all the P's and Q last names tomorrow, kind of thing. Again, you have many things on your plate as an executive leader. but you getting a firsthand pulse of what the culture is will be invaluable for you making decisions.
Great, thank you both. And we did have a question in the chat about survey tools. To your point, Heather, someone noted that SurveyMonkey has gotten kind of expensive for their subscriptions. And I believe it was Emily shared that there is a Google survey tool that's available, and I'm sure there are others as well. If you, Heather or Sujata, have favorites, please feel free to share those, or if others on the call have tools that they appreciate, please feel free to throw those in the chat.
I think the Google survey allows you to create your own survey on a pretty basic level and seems simple and straightforward to use. I haven't used it. I've used SurveyMonkey, but it's, and I've only been a respondent to Google survey, which seems easy enough. The question is whether you can do any analysis, whether it'll sort of spit some analysis and do some reports for you. So.
We got a question in the Q&A wondering if you have any general advice for dealing with an executive director transition that was planned pre-COVID coming up in the next few months. And I don't know if you want to provide any more context than that, whoever asked the question, but so feel free to throw that in anonymously as well. But just to start out, any general thoughts?
It's fun, that's for sure. So we, executive transition and executive director CEO searches is something that Keys does in our repertoire of services. And we are working on one right now that was planned ahead of time. It was planned over a series of months. It was announced in January, and they'll probably make their hire here in the next couple of weeks. And many of our early candidates obviously had no idea what would be facing them, 10 weeks later in the process. I've spoken with several boards, and my general perception is a good number of board members are kind of having a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction and suggesting, can we convince them to put it off? Can we convince them to hang out for one more year? We saw a lot of that during the Great Recession. Many planned retirements 10, 12 years ago were put off 2 or 3 years. From the person that was retiring or planning retiring, some of it was an economic situation. Their retirement funds, if they had them or if they had built them up, had been reduced significantly. And so they chose to work another couple of years. From the board side, there is oftentimes a sense of security that, oh, they've been around for 3 years or 30 years, whatever it is, and they'll know what to do. We don't want them to leave yet. There's also this question, I think, Lisa, as you said, was a planned transition. There's also the unplanned transition where the board or the CEO realizes that the people that are in those positions may not be working out, may not be coping well at this time, and may not be able to lead through these uncertain times. And you just have to make those changes and decisions as a leader about what you're going to do with your team. For a planned transition based on the situation, it could very well be worth it to say, could they extend 3 or 6 months? If that's acceptable for the organization and based upon what type of organization it is. So, organizations that are food banks or delivering shelter or in domestic violence situations right now, they are, like many of our healthcare workers, working 16, 20 hours a day, and there's pure exhaustion among the teams. It's evident in so many things, and they're all working tremendously hard, doing amazing work. But if that leader is choosing to retire or had a planned retirement, maybe it would be helpful to the organization to extend that 3 or 6 months if possible, just to get through the immediacy of the situation we're in right now. So I think it's worth discussion. It's worth conversation at the executive committee and the board level of your organization. And if you are an executive committee or board member, have a conversation about asking your CEO if they are willing to and can stay or extend it for, X period of time. I would encourage you put a deadline on it, not indefinitely. But based on your organizational situation, it might be appropriate to explore that.
So I'm also seeing, though, however, searches that are moving forward during this time where ED searches are continuing, and the boards and the search committees are doing searches online. I've also seen one or two cases where the CEO had, during this transition, it's a little bit awkward for sure. There is no doubt that it's awkward for the new ED or CEO to not be face to face with the people that they're going to be working with. But I think some of those CEOs are doing interesting things in terms of doing small group meetings, doing one-on-ones, still having office time, all of that online to get to know the people that they'll be working with. So that onboarding process, even though it's not face-to-face, is still happening online. Certainly, you know, if they have access to the documentation, to the history, this certainly is a time to get up to speed. Board members are meeting in small groups with the new CEO, with the new ED in small groups so that they get to know. Similarly, they're having conversations with broader stakeholders. So if the ED is coming into the position during this time, so there are certainly opportunities to continue to be onboarded. And as I said, I'm also seeing CEO searches, ED searches have, you know, moving forward without having to ask the person who's announced their resignation to stay on as well.
Great, thank you both. I am not seeing any additional questions in the Q&A, so I'll just put out one last call for questions. And in the meantime, I want to say thank you to all of you for participating. Thanks for your great questions. And thank you, Heather. Thank you, Sujata, for your guidance and for your time and expertise today. We appreciate you being with us. How can folks best contact you if they'd like to follow up with any questions or would like to engage your services?
Gee, one thing that we didn't do was put our contact information out here. So maybe Emily, if I'm okay with it, if you're Sujata, to maybe put it in the chat.
Yeah, and I saw that our website. Oh, there it is. The website. My website is up in the chat box, and so you can certainly find my email there, or on LinkedIn. You can find my email on LinkedIn at sujata@ksujata.org.
And Sujata and I spoke as we planned for this earlier today, in that we recognize a lot of your HR related questions might be very specific and complicated. We, again, are not legal lawyers and employment lawyers, but if you do have a question you'd like to forward to us, she and I will, we don't presume there to be 100 type of questions, but we'll take you know, individual questions that are very situationally specific, and we'll try to get answers within the next week. Based on the number that we get. So you can send them in on the chat or reach out to us directly, and we'll do our best to be helpful and provide input where we can and where we think it's within the realm of our expertise.
Great. Well, thank you both for your generosity in that regard. And again, thanks for being with us today. I hope you all stay well, stay in good spirits, and I hope we'll see you again next week. Take care.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Emily.